Skull Rock Podcast is brought to you by the generosity of the following companies. The Old Mill Press, publishing beautifully crafted books that illuminate our world. To learn more, visit theoldmillpress.com. And by listeners like you. Take my hand. Kat, take my hand. Just take my hand. Okay. And let me tell you about the great Disney travel deal for this week because the monitor got back on. Yay. You can save on rooms at select Disney resorts this fall and holiday season. It is that time of year after all. So take advantage of this deal. Now you can contact Kristen at themeparksandcruises@gmail.com to save. You can take advantage of her expertise and navigation of the Walt Disney World, Disneyland, and so many more theme parks and cruise lines, little travel portals, so you don't have to do it yourself. All right? And you can save on tons for your vacation. You can see I'm vamping because I'm trying to get everything back up and running here. But you can stay in the magic this fall and holiday season at select Disney Resort hotels. Save up to 30% on rooms for stays most nights November 24th through December 25th this year. You can enjoy savings Sunday to Thursday nights from October 6th to November 21st. What a deal. Plus, get free park hopper benefits when you take advantage of this offer and upgrade to a Walt Disney hotel room and ticket package that includes non-discounted 4-day or longer date-based theme park tickets with park hopper. So hop all you like and save up to 30% at all these great Disney resorts like Animal Kingdom Lodge, Boardwalk Inn, the Beach Club Villas Resort, Port Orleans. You can save up to 25% on some of the other more popular resorts like Bay Lake Tower and Disney's All-Star Sports and Coronado Springs, my personal favorite, right? So there is tons of savings to be had. Explore all the different ways you can save by contacting Kristen today at themeparksandcruises@gmail.com. But wait, there's more, because Universal Orlando has a brand new ticket deal as well, surrounding all that hype around Epic Universe. And so it's all going to be there for your taking. Halloween Horror Nights is really just a few weeks away when it comes down to it. And I love Halloween Horror Nights. That is great if you're a horror movie buff, a scare buff like myself. Of course, the new DreamWorks land is also open with Shrek and Kung Fu Panda and Trolls, all the stuff that my kids love. Absolutely. So go ahead. You can do this Florida residence exclusive deal for unlimited day ticket, providing access to Universal Studios Florida and Islands of Adventure for an unlimited number of days now through December 18th this year. It's a big deal, right? It's only like $199 plus tax. It's absolutely amazing. It won't get you into Hollywood Horror Nights because that's another separate hard ticket event, but a great deal nonetheless. Take advantage of that deal and so much more for the Universal Orlando Resort, as well as Universal Studios over there at on the left coast, or Disneyland, or the Disney Cruise Line and the new Treasure Ship, or any cruise line whatsoever. Once again, book with Kristen for get your free quote today. Save on all these great deals. Once again, theme parks and cruises at gmail.com. That's themeparkandcruises@gmail.com.
Hi, this is Fred Klein, director, storyboard artist, and art director, and you are listening to the Skull Rock Podcast.
Skull Rock Podcast, where you hear the stories behind the adventures. With your hosts, Aljon Go and Dave Bossert.
Welcome to Skull Rock Podcast, the show about all things Disney and pop culture. Every week, we take you behind the scenes of some of your favorite Disney films, theme park attractions, performances, books, music, as well as what's streaming, what's in theaters, and what's going on in this universe of entertainment. I'm Aljon Go, musician and longtime Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, and pop culturist, and you can email me, Aljon, ALJON, at skullrockpodcast.com.
And I'm Dave Bossert, artist, filmmaker, author, and welcome to the Skull Rock Podcast. If you love Disney and pop culture, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can also like and follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. You can also email me at dave@skullrockpodcast.com. Well, Aljon, here we are again with our third truncated program. We've got the first part of a 4-part interview with legendary layout artist Ed Ghertner. Ed is coming off of a 45-year career in animation, and he has an amazing resume of films that he worked on, not only as a layout artist, but as a supervisor in the layout department at Disney. So let's check out this conversation. This is part 1 of our interview with layout artist Ed Ghertner.
Enjoy.
Let's do it.
Skull Rock Podcast. Interview time.
Well, Aljon, here we are again. We've got another great guest. We've got art director, layout supervisor, designer, animator, Ed Ghertner. Ed, welcome to the Skull Rock Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's going to be fun.
And our studio audience goes wild with applause, as always. You know, they're so great to our guests. You know, Ed, it's great to see you, and it's great to have you on the show. You retired recently from animation after 45 years. Am I right on that?
Yeah.
45 years in the business, and we're going to get into, you know, what you worked on and everything. But I always ask the question, how did you get into the animation business? What was your path, you know, and go back as far as you want.
It's actually started when I was a kid, because where I was growing up, there weren't too many kids my age. And so I had a lot of free time on my hand. And so what I did, I picked up a pencil, and I was always a daydreamer. So I would go off and do drawings on anything I could find. You know, I think my mom can agree to that one. But I would play around and do drawings. And my grandfather worked at Disney in transportation.
Oh, wow. Now, at the studio or at the studio. Okay. And
he would bring home the films whenever I said, hey, right. Can you check out? So I got to see all the films. That was before, you know, video.
Let me ask you this question. I want to back up for a second, because you said you grew up where there weren't a lot of kids. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the San Fernando Valley, but in the north end of the San Fernando Valley, and for some reason, there weren't any kids my age.
Well, and that was a more rural area at the time, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's not. It hadn't been built up the way it is now. So there were still ranches out there, right?
Yeah. And that was in the early '60s, and so because my grandfather worked at the studio, you know, I got to go to, when you were between 7 and 9, they used to have Christmas parties. And you would show up and they'd give you a bag, and then you'd walk around the studio lot, and they'd throw candy and toys at you.
Wow.
And it was fun at that time, because things were just getting hot at the studio. And so at the Christmas party, they'd have the Osmonds and Jackson 5, and they'd have people, you know, and they would run the Mickey Christmas cartoons. And so it was a lot of fun. And that, you know, it's like, yeah, let's go to Disneyland. There's a picture, and I should have picked it up, of me when I was about 3 weeks old at Disneyland.
Wow.
58, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And so anyway, the interest was there and all along. And I was kind of a shy person at that point. And when I was a kid, and my parents moved when I was a teenager, so that made it even rougher, you know, to kind of meet friends and be involved with people. And so when we moved, I started at a new school, and I took art classes.
Now, where'd you move to? Did you stay in Southern California?
I keep jumping around.
That's all right. Did you stay in Southern California?
Yeah. Actually, I grew up grew up. It was Arleta, and then we moved up to Porter Ranch.
Okay.
So it was a class change, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it was middle class working folks up to upper class, and as a teenager, it was kind of like, well, what can I do? So I always took shop classes and I took art classes, and I was actually a math art major, which, your brain is split in half. It was a lot of fun. But in the art classes, I started doing drawings, and especially the girls would come over and go, "Oh, what do you have?" So it may open the door for me to be a little bit more open to people. And it was like, oh, he's the artist. So as that evolved, as I got into high school, I took more classes. I took architecture and life drawing and all sorts of stuff that we had at the time. And I asked my grandfather, I said, is there somebody that I can talk to about getting into the studio? And he said, well, I'll get a name for you. And so he gave me Ed Hanson's name, who was the head of animation at the time. And I went in. I had a little portfolio. At the time, I had done quick sketches from the 72 Olympics.
Uh-huh.
And so I had all these drawings, and I walked in, and Ed saw them. He goes, oh, well, here, let me show you. Geez, I'm forgetting everybody's names now. That's what happens when you get old. Eric Larson was next door.
Eric Larson, right?
Yeah. And so Eric said, oh, yeah, come on in. I'm sitting next to Eric Larson. I'm going, oh, my God. Here's the man. And he's looking at my drawings. He goes, these are nice. Well, this is nice. He goes, yeah, I think it'd be good for, we're starting the school, Cal Arts. And I said, well, I'm only in 10th grade. So, I got 3 years to go. And he goes, yeah, well, we're not starting it for another year and a half or whatever it is. And at the time, I said, well, okay, great. I'll be back. And so when it came time, I think it was 11th grade, I had to file up at Cal Arts, and they accepted me. But it was funny. I turned in my portfolio, and Jack Hanna, I had seen Jack at the studio, and came up went to Cal Arts, and then he said, oh, no problem. So I'm waiting for the mail for the acceptance letter, and I see the letter from Cal Arts, and I rip open it, and I look at it, and it says, well, we're sorry, we didn't accept you. And I went, huh? What am I going to do now? And luckily my mom was great. She said, look, don't take no for an answer. Find out why they didn't take it, because they said they wanted you. Call them up, find out the real answer to this. So I called Jack up, and he said, hey, Ed, how you doing? And I said, well, not so good. And he said, well, what's the matter? And I said, well, I got the letter from you guys, and it said that you didn't want me up there. And he went, what? So I guess a whole bunch of letters had gone out backwards.
Oh, no.
So he goes, no. So they went through all their letters, and yes, I was accepted. There was 24 of us, I think, in the class. That was
were they all rejected first, and then? Yeah,
I don't know if anybody else did, but wow. So that was the second year of the program. So all of us that were up there, Brad Bird, John Lasseter, Tim Burton was in my class, Chris Buck was in my class, Mike Giamo. So it was a great group of people in there, and that's what really kicked me off. And working with the teachers who had done the work, which really helped, because they were talking from experience.
Yeah. I mean, aside from Jack Hanna, who was running the program initially, you had Teehee and you had Elmer Plummer and you had Ken Anderson and Bill Moore,
Ken O'Connor and
Ken O'Connor, and you had Bob McRae.
Yeah.
And Jules Engels was running the experimental animation program.
Yeah, and this is where my story is going to spread out a little bit. My uncle, who I'm named after, worked at Disney from 30 to about 42, 44, somewhere in there after the strike. And he left, and he was part owner of UPA.
Oh, okay. So he knew Jules, yeah.
Yeah, and he and Jules knew each other. So there was a connection there. So I had, I could talk to Jules and to the other guys. So it was all before the big shakeup. And my uncle owned a studio called, here we go. I'm trying to remember the name.
While you're thinking of that, I have to ask the question: did your uncle strike? Was he on? Strike?
I don't. Yeah.
And then did he get the boot afterwards because of it?
I think he left.
Yeah,
because he was more in the budget end of it, but he produced the Gerald McBoing and Mr. Magoo stuff.
Well, yeah, but when he went to UPA, I'm talking about when he left Disney.
Yeah, I don't know if he left or he got booted.
Yeah, because after the strike, I mean, there was a lot of animosity from Walt.
Oh yeah,
and he sort of had his hit list of people he was going to get rid of.
Oh yeah. I don't think he got let go because his wife, my aunt, her sister, my great aunt, married one of Walt's nephews.
Oh, okay.
So I wouldn't think, but
so there was a lot of different connections there.
Yeah. There's a whole mess full, but my uncle took. Oh my God! Now I get on camera and the brain just goes.
That's all right. Take your time. It's totally fine. You know what? We at the Skull Rock Podcast, Al, John, and I, we want our guests to just have a leisurely conversation, and if it takes multiple episodes to tell your story, that's what we do.
Yeah, good. I want to say it was Playhouse. It wasn't Playhouse Pictures. It was David Hilberman's company in New York that my uncle bought. What had happened was that UPA wanted to start UPA East, which is kind of funny because everybody started in the East but moved to the West. So UPA was going to start a studio, and they sent him back there to find a place. Well, he did, and then he created his own studio, which he did commercials. He took Bill Teitla and a couple other people with him.
And David Hilberman was one of the instigators or one of the people involved in the strike against Disney, the animation strike against Disney in 41.
Yeah.
And he was also sort of called out as a communist at the time. Yeah.
And that's why my uncle bought it, because they were ready to take his company away from him. So my uncle basically bought it. But to continue, I didn't know this when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So I had no idea that I had family that was in the business.
Sure.
And so I got back. We'll go back to my situation. Is that I got in third year. They had asked me to come to the studio, and I said, well, I had spent 3 years, and Disney actually put up 3/4 of my schooling.
Your tuition. You got a scholarship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I said, well, why don't I finish it, and I'll get my degree, and I'll come in after the 4th year, which I can't believe I actually said, because they said, you want to come in? I went, let me finish my education. But I did, and I came into features as a layout trainee on Fox and the Hound.
All right, so let me step back for a second, because when I looked at your IMDb, okay,
Yeah.
and I'm starting to say that, you know, maybe IMDb stands for incorrect, mistaken database.
Exactly.
Because it says you worked on Lord of the Rings uncredited. Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings.
I
Is
did.
that true? You did. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're correct on that one.
Yes. Yeah, I did. That was it was an interesting time at Cal Arts because all our teachers were part of the industry, and they allowed us to do projects in the industry. So my second year, we got a call and they said, "Hey, would you like to go work on this picture? You're going to be working these puppets, and it's going to be down at the CBS in Studio City." And I said, "Sure, yeah. Well, what is it?" Well, it was the first Muppet movie.
Oh, wow.
And there was a bunch of us. I have a picture somewhere. I'll have to get it to you, where all of us, there were probably about 15 of us that went down there and got to work the Muppets for the Rainbow Connection song.
Oh, very nice.
And it was all day long, and it was the most fun I ever had in my life because, you know, Henson was there, Frank Oz was there, everybody was there, and people were working the Muppets because of as if they were alive. And it was fun to see Jim Henson and Frank Oz stand back and see their world come alive to them.
Yeah.
And it was obviously, this was 77, so there were no real video cameras. And it was interesting to watch how they set this up because we were in a huge sound stage, and the camera had to pull back all the way from one end to the other for the shot. And to get the shots, because obviously, you know, you have your hand up it, you know, and not to see anybody's arms, they needed a video so that they knew that, you know, you take a shot and you have to wait 2 days to get the film back.
Yeah, yeah.
So what they did is they took a closed circuit TV, like a security camera, and taped it to the Panavision camera and shot at the same time, and then ran the video back to see if you could see anybody's arms. So
how many takes did they have?
Oh, they were, boy, we were there from like 9 a.m. till 2 the next morning.
Wow.
But it was so much fun. And then the next year after that, Ralph Bakshi called up and said, "Hey, any of you guys want to, you know, work on Lord of the Rings?" And it was just after they had a problem with the budget on that one, where they spent all their money doing live action orcs running through a field in Korea.
Right.
And
just so our listeners know, Ralph Bakshi really was the first one to do a Lord of the Rings movie. This is 1978 when that was released. So, and it shouldn't be confused with the Peter Jackson trilogy of Lord of the Rings, live action films and all of that stuff.
It was BC, before computer.
There you go, BC.
And so what it was a summer program, and they were trying to finish the movie. So what had happened is they hired a bunch of us to work in Hollywood, and whoever had the lowest amount of footage would get laid off each week. So everybody was working, 90-hour weeks, and but we were getting paid. It was like, what? Going to college and getting paid? Wow. But I got to work with people like Greta Davison, and I met a lot of different people because it wasn't the closed doors of Disney. It was, there were so many people that were working on it. And it was fun. But it was hard. It was tough work, but it was fun. And they were supposed to do the second. It was like a part one. The movie stopped with Dalvin walking Frollo walking halfway up a hill, and it stopped on an in-between, which was horrible drawing. I don't know why Ralph did that, but people enjoyed it. I really appreciate Ralph because he pushed the limit. You know, it wasn't just all cutesy, and it tried to bring in more adult.
Yeah. Well, he was trying to appeal to a broader audience, and sort of the sci-fi fantasy area, and he did take, I think, some great chances. I mean, he did some good films, I thought, that were just different from what was in the marketplace.
Yeah, it's always good to stretch the limits. That's where you get new stuff from, new ideas.
Yeah. So that was really like a summer gig for you.
Yeah.
And then you went back. You finished Cal Arts, and then
finished Cal Arts and walked into Fox and the Hound.
And they were waiting for you with open arms.
Yeah. Tom Enriquez had just left, and there was a space open, and it was like, yeah, thank you. So I was in layout. I was working with Don Griffith. And next door to me was Wooly Reitherman, and Frank and Ollie had come up, and they were just getting started on their book. And Milt Kahl came in one day, which was an interesting time. We all had a chance to take a shot at the art design of the Black Cauldron, because that was the next movie up. And they had called Milt in, and Milt came in with some drawings, and all I remember is hearing him in the hallways. I don't care. It's the last time I'm coming in here. God damn it, I'm leaving this place. And I thought, oh God, that's Milt. Okay. But I was really lucky to be there at the studio with going to school with the experienced artists, and being at the studio with the experienced
sort
artists.
of that transition from that original generation that sort of built the studio with Walt. Sort of handing the torch off.
Yeah, and what had happened the year before, actually 2 years before, is when Don Bluth had left, and he took a lot of the people away. So all of us at Cal Arts who were qualified enough got pulled in, which was great.
Yeah,
allowed us to grow and have a turn at it. So when I got in there, I was working with Don Griffith, and I got hazed. I got hazed at the coming in. It was a new kid.
So when you say hazed, can you sort of explain that a little bit in terms of hazing an artist?
Yeah, it was kind of a
hazing in the Army or something.
Yeah, well, it was kind of that. I was green, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I wanted to please everybody. So it was like, you'd get go get the pan stretcher. The pan stretcher. What the hell is a pan stretcher? So I learned really quickly what the comedic hazing was about. There is no pan stretcher.
Right. Yeah, that's like in the Boy Scouts when you sent a new scout off to the next troop and told them to go get the left-handed smoke shifter.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it was tough because I really wanted to make my mark, and I really wanted to do stuff. And Don Griffith was very patient with me. And I got one of the first things I did a pan for Fox and the Hound, where the hunter is driving up the road and he goes around a cliff and he's going back to his cabin. And I had... At that time, there were no computers. So scene planning basically was the layout guys with a Texas Instrument calculator and moving the peg bars and filling out our own sheets.
Yeah.
Luckily, I had Ruthie Thompson was
the great Ruthie Thompson.
Great Ruthie.
She's fantastic.
She was an amazing person.
Yeah.
And Dave Thompson and Brian
Sullivan.
Huh?
Brian Sullivan, wasn't it?
No, he went into live action. Brian, I can't think of his name right now.
Yeah.
I'll get it later. But and Don Borland. There were quite a few people in scene planning, but there was so much going on. So I figured out the pan move and sent it off to camera. And it was, in those days, you looked at it, you went over it a number of times, you sent it off to camera, and 2 days later you get your film back, but you didn't know what it would look like. So, it could go off the screen or something. So luckily it worked. And so it was up in dailies. And it was my first chance to go into dailies. I get up there in a, I think the room was 8 feet or 10 feet wide by 30 feet long. And when Roy Disney would come in, he was smoking at the time.
Yeah.
I don't think you couldn't barely see the screen because of all the smoke with when the projector was running. But we ran it in dailies, and Art Stevens was the lead at the time, and he said, well, that looks good. Let's send it up. So went off, and it got painted. Next time everybody saw it was in color dailies.
Wow.
All of a sudden, the truck is going off the ridge and not coming back on. I just went, oh my God. And then everybody was like, who did that? Who did that? I'm going, oh my God. Oh, did I mess up? I thought it was me. And so right after dailies, I went up to background, and I'm looking at the background, and I placed the stuff down, because what we did in those days, a thing called Blue Sketch. Yeah. Which I don't know if you've explained it before.
No, I want you to explain it to our listeners.
Okay. Actually, Blue Sketching was an introduction. It was a great introduction for people starting out in layout, because what you did is you got the full scene, you got the animation, and you had the rough layout, and you put them down, and you would take extreme poses, and you would copy the extreme poses in blue, a la Blue Sketch. And so that you had a full picture of what the action would take place over the layout, so that the background painters could paint for action. You didn't want a lot of detail behind all the characters. You wanted to frame the characters. So you had a number of drawings that you copied onto this vellum that you could put down over. Vellum is a see-through paper. You could put on top of the layout and put it on a light table, and you could see through it. So I put everything down, and it worked. And I was like, what happened? I put the background down. Well, the background person decided they didn't like the way the hill looked. So, and it was all registered.
They changed the hill?
They changed the hill. And I was like,
wow.
Oh my God, thank God it wasn't me. So that was my first introduction to dailies and the workings of Disney. And
so you didn't get your head cut off?
No. But I was still a trainee, and then I was trainee for I think it was 6 weeks, I think it was. And one day somebody came to me, and somebody in the department, and they said, oh, well, we were looking at your stuff, and, I think maybe you should go back to school. And I was just heartbroken.
Really?
I was just like, oh my God, who would do something like that? Maybe they would, okay. And of course it was on a Friday. So the whole weekend was like, oh my God, what am I doing? And so I came in Monday, and Don saw me, Don Griffith, and he said, what's the matter? And I said, well, I did all these pans, and I did all this stuff, and so-and-so told me that, you guys all got together and said that, I should probably maybe go back to school for another year or something like that. And he said, what? Because, at that time, everybody smoked.
Yeah.
Pulled a cigarette out. He said, what? No, we made you an assistant. And I
So
went,
okay. They were pulling your leg.
Oh yeah. And I was so green, I didn't get it, So after that, I went, all right, now I know what to do. And so after that, everything calmed down, and we were all one big group, and it was a lot of fun. We worked our butts high. We had something like, I think we counted at the end of Fox and the Hound that we had to draw 270 barrels, ellipses.
Wow.
And it was...
You got good at ellipses.
Oh, yeah. And it was good for me because it was a mixture of natural foliage and human buildings. So right. it was a full mixture that you had to design with. And I enjoyed it. I was working with Glenn Keane on the original bear fight sequence, and it just wasn't working. So Glenn and I got together. Well, Glenn went in first and said, this isn't working. I want to do this. And they let Glenn basically re-storyboard the bear fight sequence.
Yeah.
And as he was doing that, I said, look, I'll just follow your keys and I'll set up the layouts for it. And so I did that. And it obviously, that was probably the highlight of that picture, because it was so dynamic, the way Glenn animates. And after that, I got the final shot of the picture to do, which was a multiplane. And we had none. We didn't have any Xerox machines at the studio. Now, this was 1980.
Right.
So to do a multiplane shot, I needed to resize each level so that it would look correct in perspective.
Right.
Well, they had a lucograph that Iworks had built upstairs on the second floor. And so I had to go in and draw each level as it went back into space.
Wow.
And they said, well, you got one shot at this because, two people for each level, and they wanted 5 levels. So it was an expensive shot.
And at that point, they weren't using the multiplane that much.
Right.
Right. Because it was expensive. It was very labor intensive. As you said, 2 people per level. So you had 10 people, plus you had the camera operator.
Yeah.
You had somebody on the sheet too, right?
Yeah. So. And on top of all that, you couldn't see it until you got the film back. So it was like, okay, let's go for it. And so we did, and there was one jump in one of the levels, and they said, well, let's redo it. So they, instead of saying let's reshoot it, it was like, well, we can't have 5 levels now. You have 3 levels, which means I had to go back and redo it again, which could have been disastrous, but it actually worked. And so I was lucky enough to work on the old multiplane that's now in the Frank Wells building.
Yeah, in the lobby.
I go by and I rub it every once in a while. But
what's your overall feeling about the Fox and the Hound? Was that really your first big Disney picture that you worked on?
Yes, that was.
And you didn't get a credit, or you got a credit?
Not at that time, because at that time
it was just the head layout guys.
Yeah, it was up to the producer as to who he wanted to give credit to.
Right.
And
they were still very tight on giving credit.
Yeah, that was
Yeah. And at the end of that picture, you didn't get laid off. Was there a layoff after Fox and the Hound?
No, that was
right.
We went straight into Cauldron.
Black Cauldron.
Yeah, which was, oh my God, that was killer, because we were going from a standard field, which is a 16-inch, 10 by 16, something like that, to C-scope.
Right. CinemaScope. So it was widescreen.
Yeah, it was widescreen.
Every cell was a much wider screen, like you would see if you went to a movie theater.
Yeah, it's like what we see today. It was their version of 70 millimeter, and but the problem there was all the layouts were crosshatched, so every layout not only was wide. We had to get in there and crosshatch everything.
To do the shading to give it dimension.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Instead of using a flat plane, it was a pencil sketch.
Yeah.
Feel. And I had a problem with that because the background painters weren't using the crosshatch. Why were we doing it? It was wasting time. And so I was like, oh boy, how many years am I going to be on this thing? And but it was like I said, once again, it was a fun time because I would go as I was finishing up Fox and the Hound. Don Griffith, who was the head of the layout department, was working on the Horn King's Castle, and I was always taught, you put your paper down. You draw the big shapes and you work out of the big shapes. Well, I walk over to his desk and he has a pen in his hand and a cigarette in the other. And he's starting at one end of the paper and he's drawing the Horn King's Castle. It's like it's magically appearing on his desk. And I'm looking at him and I said, Don, you have something underneath that you can see that I can't see? And he pulls a cigarette out and he goes, no. And I said, well, how can you do that? And he said, when you've been here 30 years, you know how to do it. And I went, oh, okay. But it's between he and Ken O'Connor, who taught me my basics. As a matter of fact, Ken was his boss. So I'm kind of like third generation down from O'Connor was head of layout, or he was in layout until the mid 50s. And then Don Griffith took over. And when I came in the 80s, that's when I came in. Okay. So I felt like there was a kinship there of sorts. But he was very easy to work with, and I caught the humor, and I caught, his experience in being able to do stuff like that. But at the same time, the studio was starting to stretch out a little bit, trying to find new artists or period artists, and Mobius was called in, and he was in the next hallway. Let's see, I was in C-wing, I was D-wing, I guess, or U-wing. Anyway, they had given him a title section to do for Black Cauldron, which was amazing. I'd go over and I'd see him scratching away at his desk, and then if he ever got up from his desk, I saw about 20 people running in there trying to find all his his loose drawings. I wasn't into comics, so I didn't even know who he was other than, oh, it's Mobius, okay, cool. So it was a fun time because you got to meet real art, I would call real artists. I was in a big studio and I was in the studio, and so it was an amazing time for me to come in. And I was only on the Black Cauldron for 3 months. And luckily enough, there was a director who had been ill, Dave Mitchner.
Yes.
Open heart surgery. And he had come back, and they needed some animation done for Epcot and Tokyo Disneyland. And they had asked me if I wanted to art direct all those pieces. And I said, sure. Yeah.
Was that the Exxon Energy Pavilion?
It was all pretty much all of them.
Yeah, and so I remember doing some work on the Excellent Energy Pavilion film.
Seas Pavilion, the American Pavilion, the Motion Transportation Pavilion.
Yeah.
And then we did Tall Guy, Short Guy for Tokyo Disneyland.
Yeah.
But during that time, they said, "Would you want to you want to art direct?" I was like, "Do I want to art direct?" It's like throwing a fish in front of a cat.
Yeah.
And I said, "Sure." So Dave had set up his own group downstairs in the old animation building. And they said, "Well, we've got a bunch of artists over at WDI that you're going to work with." And I said, "Oh, okay." Like once again, being green, not thinking. I walked in over at WDI and I see Ken O'Connor and I see Mark Davis and Ward Kimball and all these people.
Coates and all of
them. Yeah. And they're sitting around the table. And I said, "So where are the artists that I'm supposed to work with?"
They were them.
And O'Connor says, in his beautiful Australian accent, "Well, now the student is the teacher." And I went, "Oh!" I just about passed out. I said,
"Wow,
you guys?" Yeah. What do you want us to do? And I went, "Oh." It was hard to get the words out, but
so you went off of Black Cauldron to do this.
Yes.
And did you stay off of Black Cauldron or did you come back?
I didn't. I didn't come back to Black Cauldron.
Okay.
So what had happened was working with Jack Boyd. I got to work with Jack, because they pulled all these old guys back in because everybody was so busy on Black Cauldron.
Yeah, and Jack Boyd was one of the veteran effects animators.
Yeah, and so he was working on the Mexican Pavilion. And it was funny at the time when I was working on the American Pavilion, there was a shot of picture frames. I actually have a piece of artwork here. There were 3 times, there were 9 or 10 frames that we had. 3, 6, 9 frames. And animation in each one, like a sewing machine and the cotton gin and cars and just the inventions of America.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was BC before computer. There were 100 strips of film that we had taken to the optical printer to have done. And you can't imagine the work that these guys had to do to get all that stuff working.
Wow.
And it was amazing. It was a fun time to be there because we were really pushing everything to the limits.
And again, it was all old school. It was analog. It was before computers. And
the ink and paint people, or I should say the Xerox people, were pulling their hair out, trying to figure out stuff. And at the same time, there was somebody trying to invent a new way of creating color line for cells. And I'm forgetting the name of it. But what it was a photographic process. Yeah. And what had happened was that when you do a photographic process, there's no heat involved, which means there's no place for the paint to run to. Yeah. And they tried painting on some of those cells, and the paint would just run off the edge of the cells.
Yeah, it was like you had Rain-X on it, right?
Yeah.
It would just beat up and run off. Yeah.
But it was a great idea because you got all the color you needed, from the color lines. But it just wasn't practical.
Yeah.
And at that time, that's when things really started jumping at the studio. I had worked on a couple of short projects through WDI with John Hinch that never got made, but it was great for me because we all went up to Ron Miller's office, which was Walt's office, and I got to work basically in Walt's old office. Mm. and be there with Ron Miller. And he was, in spite of, they criticize him for not knowing, but it was kind of good for us because he would accept, he allowed us to do our work.
Yeah.
And he could see it, he'd want to see it and say, okay, this is good. Let's move ahead. So at that time we were down in the last wing of the building. Roger Rabbit the idea was getting started. They were working on Tron. People were coming in from different studios to work. So we were all meeting different people.
Yeah.
And playing volleyball at the same time.
There you go.
And that was fun. That was a lot of fun. But there was so much going on. It was great. But unfortunately, at that time, there wasn't much else going on at the studio. And the budget for our animated pictures were going up and up and up and up.
The other thing you have to remember too during that period when Black Cauldron was in production was there was a lot of turmoil going on with Saul Steinberg, who was trying to take over the company, and then
yes,
Roy resigning from the board, and
yep.
then bringing Michael Eisner and Frank Wells in and Katzenberg and pushing Ron Miller out. So there was a lot of craziness happening there.
Yeah, I remember the day that Sid Sheinberg and I guess somebody else came in with their people and they started pointing at everything, and we were in a corner room watching these guys walk down the Mickey Avenue, and you could tell, and they're well, we'll get rid of this and we'll get rid of that, and I was like, oh my God, these guys, they can't be serious, Yeah. And then Roy came back in, which was great. I mean, knowing Roy and working with Roy and all those pictures that we had worked together on.
Yeah.
He was great. I enjoyed working with Roy tremendously because I didn't know Walt, but he had the same envision that Walt had and the same feeling for the company. And it passed on to people,
Yeah. Well, he cared.
Yeah.
I mean, he cared, and during that whole transition when Michael Eisner and Frank Wells came in and Jeffrey Katzenberg, it was Roy who saved the animation department. We all know that. I just like to emphasize it when I'm talking with.
Oh yeah, no, I
having these interviews,
I wave that flag.
Yeah.
And so it was an interesting time. Well, right after the Epcot Tokyo Disneyland stuff kind of went away because we were done, up popped Basil of Baker Street.
Right.
The Great Mouse Detective, which was too much of a mouthful for a lot of people. It should have just been called Basil. But I was in layout at the time, and there was still a lot of turmoil going on in the studio, and they ran through two other art directors, and I got to co-art direct with Mike Peraza
on Great Mouse Detective.
On the Great Mouse. And it was funny because we were at the time able to, at that time we got budgets, real number budgets. And I remember one day it was just Mike and I working in layout, and we had about half the picture set up. And we get our mail, and I open it up, and I'm looking at it, and I look around my desk, and I look at Mike, and I said, how much are you making? Because they had a budget of like $50,000 for layout for that week.
Yeah.
And I said, how much are you making? I'm not making that, So we both kind of called up Bernie, and Bernie Madsen was the producer at the time.
Right.
So we walked down there, and I said, Bernie, is this right? You know, because I want the picture to be made. I don't want it to break the bank, so to speak. And I think that was the last time I got a budget. Because they had, well, it was 30%. I found out overhead was like 30% at the time because there was no live action being done. So they had to pay for the whole studio because animation was the only thing being done.
Right. And also, you know, what a lot of the artists don't realize is that what you're getting paid isn't the full picture. You know, you're getting paid a salary, and then there's the overhead cost, but there's also the fringe benefits. You know, so you know the health and welfare, and all the stuff that they're paying into the union funds. You know, so and that's like 30 or 40% on top of your salary.
Yeah, and that's what they should really teach younger kids coming up. That it isn't just salary. You know, that the movie business has a lot more to it. Just so you understand where the budgets are coming from.
Yeah.
And so we were working on that and got to see, you know, the start of the picture. And then Bernie decided that he was going to have somebody else art direct. And
who'd they bring in?
Guy Vasilovich was the person they brought in, and I had no problem with Guy.
And Guy had left.
Yes,
but he came back.
Yeah, I think yes. And I was like, well, you know, what's he going to do that I couldn't do? And I just asked questions, and there really wasn't an answer given, and so I took it upon myself, well, Mike and I did, to write a letter to Roy Disney and say, hey, wait a minute, you know, if you keep doing this, you're going to lose good people. And that's what I put in there. I had no problem working under Guy or Bernie or any of them, you know, but I wanted an answer, like, why? And we sent it off and didn't hear anything for weeks. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, and you remember the hallways. I mean, they echoed quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, all I heard was ring, ring, ring. I pick up the phone, and Bernie's on the phone, and I think I heard him louder screaming down the hall than talking through the phone.
Wow.
And he said, "Get your in here now." Oh, shit. They got the letter. So went into Bernie's office, and Dave Mitchner was a director. John and Ron were directors, and Bernie was a director. Who else?
Bernie was a producer director.
Yeah, producing director, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I sat down and I'm like, okay, what's this about? Am I going to get fired or what? And Bernie, said, hey, well, what's the big idea? And I said, well, I know, I didn't get an answer from anybody. I wanted an answer of why, what was I doing wrong, or what was the reason for taking me off of this? And they really couldn't come up with an answer. They said, but we'll work with you. We're not going to fire you. We want you to be on here. We want you to have your dues. And I appreciated that,
Good. You had an honest conversation.
Yeah. And that's all it was meant to be, is to, like, let's keep talking about this, because there was so much
communication.
Yes. Yeah. It's all communication. And, I guess Roy had come down on them, because otherwise I would have been fired. I really do. I mean, looking at it, Monday morning quarterback. But everything was cool. It smoothed out. But that was about the time they moved us off the lot.
And I think that's a perfect place for us to kind of take a break and pick it up next week. And we're going to talk about, and you say moved us off the lot. I think our listeners know well enough that I say we were kicked off the lot. That's
they
how
booted
I
us, yes.
Yes. I'm more blunt about it. It's my New York, So
I'm trying not to cuss. That's why.
But Ed, it's great having you on the Skull Rock podcast. This is great material. I mean, it's just great hearing your stories. We're going to pick it up next week, moving over to Flower Street. So we will see you then.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being on the Skull Rock podcast.
This is Charlie Bonifacio, animation artist, and you're listening to the Skull Rock podcast.
Skull Rock podcast is brought to you by listeners like you. We would like to thank Christine Bannis, Spencer Wright, Lindsay Scaife, and Joshua Volkert. Support the show for as little as 99 cents per month by clicking on our listener support link in our show notes. If you are interested in advertising your event, business, or service, please email Aljon at skullrockpodcast.com. Thank you for your ongoing support.
Your attention, please. Now loading on track number 1 for a trip around Walt Disney's Magic Kingdom.
Skull Rock Podcast.
All aboard.
Your Main Street to the world of Disney.
Yet another great interview. I hope our audience has been enjoying these interview segments that we're going to be doing for the next few weeks right here on Skull Rock Podcast. But don't forget, if you love Disney and pop culture, be sure to like and subscribe to all of our feeds there. Wherever you find podcasts, of course, we're all available on all the major services, including now YouTube. So check that out as well. And we would certainly love it if you gave us those 5-star reviews. Everything helps the algorithm and gets us in front of more people. Leave us those reviews and those algorithms will just be popping. Skull Rock Podcast. Share the show as well. We're on all the socials, as I mentioned, Facebook, X. Dave and I are both on LinkedIn, also Instagram. And you can check out the vault of shows there at skullrockpodcast.com. You can even throw some money in the tip jar, if you will. There's a little sponsor link in there if you feel so inclined to support what we do as we bring you this show for free every single week. You can also email Dave and myself. Listener feedback is important. Dave at skullrockpodcast.com or Aljon at skullrockpodcast.com. You can also find me on Instagram. The best way to find me, Aljon Go on Instagram. You can also check out my other podcast that I host with my wife, Kristen, and Kat R. Corey, called Dining at Disney Podcast, where we talk about Disney parks and food. You can find that drop twice a week wherever you find podcasts as well. Dave?
Yeah, and Aljon, as I've been mentioning to people over the past month or so, February 21st to the 23rd is the Animation You All Expo in Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah. And we're going to be there. Aljon and I are going to be there, believe it or not, in person together for the first time. And also, I just want to remind folks, you can hear my Tunes Behind the Tunes show on SiriusXM, Disney Hits, channel 133. Each month we spotlight a new show. You can get signed copies of my books at theoldmillpress.com. And of course, you can check me out on davidbossert.com with a bunch of free content and free stuff you can send away for. And with that, Aljon, I'm going to say go out, have a fantastic week, everybody. Be kind to one another. And we'll see you back here next Monday, right here on the Skull Rock Podcast.